Welcome to Tacos and Trends, the podcast by Made Trends, where we explore the intersection of culture, consumer behavior, and the trends shaping tomorrow. You're listening to the first episode of our new season, The Future is Fractional, a limited series that explores how powerful women are reshaping the C-suite with practical insights for growth-minded founders, female founders, and fractional C-suite pros, sharing how to scale big results on a realistic budget. Nina, thank you very much for being here today. We're going to get into it, but first, for listeners, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe, like, follow. All the links are below. And I'm just going to jump right in. So Nina's here today to talk to us about what it looks like to be a fractional CFO. I thought maybe the first place to start, Nina, we're going to get into your background later. Could you tell us in general, like, what's the definition of, like, what does a CFO do?
Thanks for having me here, Autumn. I'm really excited to chat about this. A fractional CFO is a partner at the executive level, a partner to the CEO, the other executives, the investors, the board, that brings thought leadership and finance chops to the conversation. So usually the CEO will bring vision, the CTO is going to bring the technology magic, the head of sales, the CRO, chief revenue officer might bring a plan to hit revenue and knock things out of the park. And a CFO in general, fractional or not, will bring the finance side of things where they can say, hey, here's our burn, here's our runway. Those are two sort of top of mind numbers that everyone on, should know, the executives, the board, the investors, the CEOs. And so the CFO can bring that layer of detail. There's a lot that goes under key metrics like burn, like runway, and the CFO can traverse up and down. They can go high level, they can go deep. They can go high level, deep, just like any of the other leaders, like a CTO. They could go high level technology, low level technology. And so the chief financial officer will provide that insight. Fractional, when a startup is small, then they can't pay for a full CFO. Maybe they can't or they don't want to because there's not enough work. The early stage of a business, you really want to focus on building the business. Having too many back office people, such as a CFO, kind of slow things down. They put too many layers of complexity too soon. And so fractional is really great in the sense that it's almost limiting the cost, but intentionally, but also limiting the scope of the role to just the core pieces. And sometimes that is really helpful. A lot of the investors I work with, they prefer fractional CFOs instead of a full-time CFO for that reason.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't considered that because then there's like less hoops and like less like people involved in decision making, right? That makes a lot of sense.
And often there's a phrase that I've been circulating called founder-led financials, and that takes the founder, the CEO, and takes their thoughts and really makes it govern the finance function. And connecting that to what we were just saying around if a CFO needs to fill up a full day at a startup and there's only 40 people at the company, the CFO is just going to find stuff to do that may or may not be productive to the broader vision, and it kind of pulls away from some of the founder-led areas of interest, I think, for the business.
Oh, interesting. I feel like that's like very clear, very clear. And so maybe as well, I should tell people what we're doing here. So we met at Tacos and Trends that I hosted, a female panel about like different women in business. And I have to say, it felt like you were the star of the show, Nina. Everyone like could not get enough business information. And I feel like it was for me as well. I think maybe it's like your engineering and like your CFO brain. It's so clear and so direct and breaking down. I know myself, I walked away with like a lot of like actionable things to consider for my own business. And I had the feedback from everyone. So much so that that's kind of what spawned the series. A lot of people, I have to say honestly, came to me and they were like, oh, I didn't even really know what a CFO did. Because, a lot of people now are working on like their side hustle. They're not really considering that. And unless you're like in the startup world or come from like a corporate background, sometimes you haven't had so much exposure. So I'm like very, very grateful to have you for that reason, because I feel like there's like a ton to learn. I have so many questions for my own business as well. But maybe I thought first, you've had like a very impressive past life in your career, and then it's very impressive as well. You've built your own fractional CFO business, consulting business. So maybe you could give us a little bit of your background of like how you got here and like highlights of, for you, some of the highlights.
Yeah, sure. So I have had many chapters in my life. I started off, like you said, Autumn, as an engineer out of the University of Waterloo in Canada, and worked at Microsoft and a few startups out on the West Coast in Seattle. I had a front row seat to the tech boom in the very late 90s, which also meant I had a front row seat to the tech bust in the early 2000s. And so in '01, when things were falling apart, 2001, I was sort of spinning. I was only a few years out of undergrad. And in those few years, I had had increasing levels of responsibility beyond probably my experience level would qualify me for, but that's how the Wild West was back in the late 90s. In the tech boom, there were people underqualified like me having leadership roles that we had no business having and no experience being good at. And so then when things started to crash around me, I then started my second chapter. I went to business school, got my MBA from Harvard, and following my MBA, I used that as an opportunity to do a career shift because I was a little burnt out on technology. Shifted over to investment banking, worked at Merrill Lynch on Wall Street for a few years, loved it. I covered technology companies, so I worked on a lot of deals, including IPOs, M&A, a little bit of debt, and it was really exciting. And for a little Canadian engineer now working on Wall Street, it was pretty exciting. I also looked ahead a few years beyond my level to folks that were maybe 10, 20 years ahead of me. And I never saw myself as an investment banker. Loved it, loved the work. Kind of loved the lifestyle too. It was really exciting. But the tech industry was recovering. And so I decided to leave this second chapter, which was, more of a business investment banking chapter, and go back into tech. So then that starts the third chapter of my life, which is being a C-level executive at startups. So I started as a combo CFO, CTO, which is an unusual combo, but for me, it made a lot of sense. I was an engineer and a banker, and at a small startup, people need to wear many hats, so I wore those too. Made for really interesting board meetings when I would present both of those sections. Did that for a few years, became the CEO of a company, also founded a company called Blue Trumpet in mobile advertising, sold that, then moved on to do a variety of other roles, often placed by VCs. If a company needed extra support or if they were pivoting, I would be a CEO that would go in and help them out. So that was the third chapter where I was a C-level. And then the fourth chapter, which is the current one, is being this fractional CFO. So what I've taken is all of my experience being deep in technology, being on Wall Street, being in the trenches as a CEO or various C-level roles full-time and having to figure out what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And then now I advise companies. That brings us to what I do now, which is being a fractional CFO. Typically, I'm a fractional CFO of anywhere from 3 to 5 companies at a time. Right now it's 4, which is a really great number, but it varies.
I think I love whenever we're talking about this as well. And, I've talked to other guests about this, is also running a consulting agency. The feedback from a lot of people is oh, it's great, you're your own boss. And I'm no, when business is booming, you have 15 bosses, which for me sometimes has been overwhelming. But I thought it was interesting, your take on this is that you use that almost as a positive, right? Of oh, and you're also willing to flex, a lot of the people you need to speak with maybe are happy to speak on the weekends or in the evenings. So actually you've woven together a lifestyle that I know also supports your other big goal of motherhood, which I know a lot of us can relate to. Finding the balance is crazy, but I feel every time I talk to you, I'm oh, it sounds like you've got it figured out. And you also have this idea, whenever we're speaking last about filming this, I thought it was interesting where you're oh, my book of business can hold this many clients, right? And then normally you're technically trying to put yourself out of business, right? When the job's well done, you're either you're finishing the project and placing someone who's helping them place someone full time. I say something similar as well, oh, if you're doing a good job, I'm going to put myself out of business on this project. So maybe just walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's been a learning for me. So I typically work with a company anywhere from 6 to 18 months. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. And it really depends on where the company is and the growth or the change it has in my time. One of the things that I focus on, especially coming at this from an engineer's perspective versus, say, an accountant or an auditor's perspective, because I've been neither of those, neither accountant nor auditor in my life, is I think of myself as the CTO of the finance org. And sometimes that takes a while to get set up, and sometimes it takes, less time. And so if we think of the finance function should be a highly, highly tech-savvy group and using really great software products and using them well. Through that, you get efficiencies, you get accuracy, you get high qualified people who are actually doing work that they enjoy. No one likes just clicking around and entering data when maybe AI could do it. Well, I don't mean AI in the sense of the more modern AI. I mean like just AI built into QuickBooks or whatever
Yeah.
platform one's using, Roulette or Ramp. In that context, the reason I bring up the technology piece is part of what I do as I leave is just handled through better processes. So instead of
Yeah.
needing, say, two people, you need one. Or instead of needing five people, you need two. And it's just through better systems and processes. And sometimes that means I eventually leave. My title is CFO, but I often replace myself with a VP finance or a
Okay.
finance manager. It doesn't need to be another CFO. Sometimes that just doesn't make sense. If it's a software company or an engineering heavy company, really the people you want leading the company are the engineers. They're very smart, they're very organized. Or if it's any type of company, I typically do software, but a VP finance might be the right role for me to hand things off to. To go back to your question around how I think about this, it's a little bit like being a McKinsey consultant. You come in, you make these really what I think are good, smart, strategic changes in how the finance function works and how it supports the business. I think of the CFO supporting the business as opposed to the rest of the business sort of having to answer to the finance function. I
Yeah.
really like to keep it, it comes from my time as being a CEO and a CTO being, leadership first all the time and vision first all the time. And so when I think about a role, I do like to do it for at least a few months because it's hard to do something in less than a few months. 12 to 18 months ends up being often the right choice because that gives me a chance to what we used to call in the 90s eat my own dog food. So when I say, hey, here's the process, I then
Yeah.
have to live that process and I have
Yeah.
to iterate on it. And I like to be in the CFO seat for long enough to see many cycles, many quarters, many months, many examples, and tweak the processes, tweak how we think about things, tweak how we report stuff. There's a friend of mine a mentor who once gave me a great line, and that is the sophisticated mind that can find simplicity on the other side of complexity. So a junior finance person or
Yeah.
someone new to finance will expand their skill set sort of on the simple side. And then someone who's quite advanced can really delve into the complexity, which is also a great place to be because sometimes that's necessary. And then the next level beyond that is the simplicity after complexity. And that's where I like to live. So, we take a lot of complex concepts and a lot of data flow, a lot of numbers, a lot of transactions, and we organize it in a way that shows the leadership and the investors where the money's going, insights, clarity, simplicity. Here are the 5 buckets that we're tracking or 10 buckets that we're tracking of costs, even though it might be a complicated list.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little deep in the details here, so we might want to take this
No,
out.
no, no. I think it's interesting. I think people don't have so much like insight into how like businesses run. At the end of the day, right? It could be like CTO led or it could be led by a CEO. But I think at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie. Like you have
Numbers
to
don't lie.
I saw
Yep.
that with like running my own business. I was like, this is me like originally with like the profit and loss. Why did they keep sending me this? I was like not even looking at it. And
Right.
then one day I was like, oh, then we had a long talk and it was explained to me like the power of the numbers and like why they were important and like my take on like what were good numbers didn't take into like all the considerations of like how a business actually works. For me it was like a huge unlock, and so I feel like but not everyone has like access to like someone like you who can like explain it and be like, oh, this is like actually how you take this business from here to here. Like, and I feel like if you don't understand financials or you don't pay attention to them, growth is impossible, right?
Right. And that gets us to sort of the second part of what a CFO does, which is highly strategic. It's sort of understanding the trends. And if those trends are great, then we sort of keep throwing
Yeah.
fuel on that fire. If the trends aren't great, what gets measured gets managed. And that's where looking at these statements is really helpful. We can start to manage, say, the relationship of one thing that I always take a look at is payroll as a percent of revenue.
Yeah.
How are the people and how is that as a cost structure related to revenue? Over time, that should get better and better and better so we can get more. And I don't mean it in terms of squeezing people. I mean in terms of processes and
Yeah.
getting the right people and finding ways to price things so that we can add more value. And so the same set of people at the same cost would yield, more revenue. Maybe they can be tech supported in different ways. So seeing the trends, what gets measured gets managed is a really,
I
really
love
big
that.
deal.
What gets measured
Um,
gets managed. I love
and
it.
and I think a lot of why I like to spend, say, 6 to 18 months is there is a version of metrics that I could give someone on their business in the first 2 months. And it'll be
Yeah.
fine. It'll be good. I've done this a lot. It'll be all right. But The version that I would give them at month 8 and 9 is so much more nuanced. Every founder deserves to have metrics that are customized to them. Even if it's,
I
say,
agree. I agree completely, right?
gross
That it's
margin,
almost like if they had the same skill set as you did, like what they would turn out, right?
what they would,
Like
that's exactly it.
that's like what we say this exact same thing, like, oh, we could do something like quickly, but like it's in the nuance, like is like I feel like that's the secret sauce and that's the power. Whenever you're like, oh, I'm like in your head, I can speak your language, but I have this like skill set you don't, that for me like becomes very, very powerful. And it's like also can like change the course of like business, right? But I think it's hard to like convince people, one, to like sometimes it's hard to like get that access, right? And then
Yeah.
sometimes I find like people, at least from like my seat where we sit, like it'll be hard for people to digest so much, like whenever you like get it so much and like can take it to a different level. But I think that's amazing, right? And I think it's amazing if you like love business and you like growing things. It's like this amazing superpower. If you really want to grow something, for me, like the power, and numbers are not my thing. I'm like creative. I could come up with like, lots of like floaty pictures and things. But in the last 5 years, the understanding that has been very powerful for me. I think for people listening as well, it could like totally kickstart them into thinking down that path, or like considering what they're doing with their QuickBooks or like with their like bookkeeping system, even as like a starting point to talk about the contrasts and similarities. I think a contrast is, as I mentioned, like I'm not a numbers person at all. You clearly are. So I feel like what's one of your like CFO superpowers, but that you apply in like your normal life? What are some things that you like, maybe top three superpower like ideas that you apply?
Yeah, one of the things that I have built the skills at in professionally is designing a big picture. And so designing a big picture view, some set of numbers that give me a small set of numbers, but well formed, that give me a big picture and give me a sense of where I'm at. So I use that in my own personal life all the time. So for example, even just my own financials, I have organized in a way that over the years has gotten easier and easier and easier to update and more and more and more helpful. It is not complex. It is straightforward and meaningful. And that's something I tell a lot of folks, both in their personal life as they think about their own financial picture, but also CEOs. Ask yourself, and maybe out loud with the finance person around you, what it is that would be helpful to see. Sometimes
Yeah.
when one starts on that endeavor, they kind of go overboard. That's common. It's like, oh, I'd love to see this and this and this. And then when you see all those things, there are one or two things or three things that really stand out as the real metric. It gives you a deeper nuanced pulse. You used that word nuance before, and I think that was a great one. It gives a nuanced pulse of what's really, really going on. And a great metric is defined by something that is easy to create and gives you insight. If it is hard to create, you're not going to get it often enough.
Yeah. Oh, I
And if
love
it's
that.
easy to
No,
create
I
and doesn't
totally.
give you insight, then that's not helpful.
Yeah,
So
then
it
what
really has
then
to
what do
be
you
the
do?
intersection of what is easy to create, so you can create it whenever you want, or automatically, with some other systems that you have in place, and gives you insight, and is not part of a laundry list. It sort of speaks to itself, and sometimes that takes months to really find the sort of metrics, and they can change year over year, phase over phase, and it could be, right now it could be we need to get our technology cost. AI and cloud is really expensive. Is there, we need to get our technology costs lower as a percent of revenue. And then once that's sorted out, and there's some people maybe that have been hired to optimize these things or watch over sort of parts of your technology, then maybe the next focus is, oh, well, how can we get our repeat rate higher? How do we not always have to acquire new customers from scratch? And so the metric can change and evolve, but a simple, easy metric, that I keep going back to, that simplicity on the other side of complexity. And once you're in complexity, which most people are in, keep pushing to something to see if there's simplicity on their side. One sentence I tell CEOs talking to their finance teams is to ask the person providing the financials, what can you tell about my business from these numbers?
Yeah.
Not what can I read from it or that, but
Yeah.
as a reader of this financial statement, say the income statement, what is it that you're learning about my business? That starts a really interesting conversation because it puts both people in the principal seat
Yeah.
in the audience. Yeah.
No, I think that's interesting as well because I think whenever you see that, and there's so many like data points, I think across like multiple touch points of business now, right? You're like overwhelmed by like data touch points. And I think it's interesting, right? Because there's like how you're reading them, and then there's like across like all parts of the business, right? And then you see someone else and you're like, oh, I didn't see that. And I think if you're like not afraid to like have those insights and that pushback, right? Like for me, that space, that uncomfortable space where it's like, oh, you see that, but I see this. Well, what about this? That's where you're like, oh, you can like have growth and where you can find like the path forward. I think that's like very interesting. I think I know the answer. I have another question for you, but I think I know the answer to it, but I have to ask it anyway. You know, a lot of people who come to Tacos and Trends and who also are listening to this podcast are more rather than even than in like a traditional like startup space or like in like a side hustle space. If you're someone who's like starting a side hustle because you have this idea to grow something, how important do you think it is to like make sure you have your personal finances clear, the side hustle finances clear, and to keep them like separated? Like what's like do you think it's possible to have the finances of the side hustle like sorted out if your personal finances are a mess? Maybe that's a different way to frame it.
Yeah, I think it really depends. Again, each person is going to be different. The side hustle versus personal, there is a tax question. Is it a single person LLC, in which case, kind of, all blends together on your taxes. If there are two separate tax books, then it's very important. I think the benefit of being mindful of of separating your finances is just so you get to claim the expenses against revenue for
Yeah.
tax purposes. So when you look at it from a selfish perspective or a self-serving perspective, the utility of being mindful of, well, was this taxi or this Uber for personal or for business? If you put it under personal, the IRS isn't going to come after you, so you can sort of always do that.
Yeah.
But if you put it under personal and you don't sort of have a good system to separate it, then you miss out on claiming it against your revenue. And so you end up paying, a few extra percent of revenue all in, just scoping the situation. Maybe you could save 5% of your revenue every year by being able to claim more expenses. And
And
that might
reinvest
be a
that, right?
motivator. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
you reinvest that or put that in your bottom pocket, in your pocket, whatever the use of those funds is. So that's sort of a technical answer and sort of a practical answer. Separately, I'm going to go back to the founder-led financials. CFOs never create billion-dollar businesses. They just don't. The people who create the billion-dollar businesses or the $10 million businesses or the $1 million businesses are the founders. What one needs to do as they think about their financials is what is it that they need to continue to unlock. Say you're marching towards $1 million idea. Great. What do you need to make that 2 million? And if it has nothing to do with financials, that's fine. For example, WhatsApp many years ago got acquired for $2 billion or something. They had 20 people at the business. I don't remember if my numbers are exactly right, but some ballpark. They did not care about financials. And yet they created $1 billion business. Facebook,
Yeah.
they weren't even thinking about revenue and they created $1 billion business. One of the things I tell accountants and finance folks, myself included, and CFOs is we have a place and it is not necessary, and we can hinder people, right? We can bog them down, or we can simplify things and let them do their business. And, then we can help them along that ride. The short answer of what I'm saying is there's no right answer. It is what brings comfort to the CEO.
Nina, I love that perspective. And I feel like because I don't think everyone has that same, or anyone who could want to work with has that same perspective. But I love that. I love this like founder like led. I think that's very empowering. And I think it's like part of like what's your like special sauce of what you like, how you like frame business, how you frame like women working, how you frame moving forward. I think it's like very empowering to be like, oh, okay, you have this perspective and you're like this superpower tool who can like help us like drive things forward. So, as I tell you always, and as I started before we started recording, I'm always so happy to talk to you. I feel like I could like pick your brain for like 100 hours. I love like your perspective. I love how you're thinking about it. I love your insights. And thank you so much for joining us today.
It was great. Thank you, Autumn.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Bye, Nina.
Bye.